My trip here yesterday, because it somewhat relates to the topic of my talk. I was coming from Austria and supposed to be here last night. I was in Salzburg. And the schedule was very straightforward. Salzburg to Innsbruck, Innsbruck to Zurich, Zurich to Zug. And of course, that was Austria, going to Germany and to Switzerland. And I know that all those countries are very meticulous on time and schedules, and everything works perfect. So I got on the train at Salzburg, went to Innsbruck, and found out that the train from Innsbruck to Zurich was broke. And they said, in German of course, I speak very little, they said there will be buses to take you to Zurich. But they didn't say where the buses were, and there were no signs to say where the buses were. And after a while, I finally was able to find out where the buses were, and I went through the train station to the very end, and then into like an alleyway, and there was no bus signs in those places where it says buses, and there was no buses. And there was an official man, and I asked the man, aren't there supposed to be buses to Zurich here? He said, no, there's no buses here. So then I noticed another man sitting on the side. He was an alcoholic, and he was saying, right, you want buses? Yeah, there are buses, but they're gone. So if it hadn't been for that man on the streets, the alcoholic, a white version of Batman, I would have, I guess, I don't know what I would have done. So I went back, and they said, back to the information place, and they said, yeah, we know the buses are gone, but there will be more. So I went back. It was a long ways, and they said, you better hurry because they may be coming very soon and leaving again. So I ran with my luggage, and I got back, and there were no buses, and some security people came, and I asked them, and they said, oh, the bus is gone, no buses. And they said, let's look at the train schedule, and the next train to Zurich was in about 4 hours. It had been delayed also, and it was delayed 3 hours. And so they said, we're not sure what you should do. And then a whole bunch of people came, and they said they were told there was going to be buses. So we waited, and we got on a bus. The bus did come, and it took us to a little town in Austria, where we got on another bus. And the other bus, next bus, was sort of a city bus where it stops at every street. And we went for 2 hours through small villages and finally wound up at a train station in some town, a little town. And at that train station, we could get a train to Zurich. So I got to Zurich about 11 last night. So for 20 hours, I had no food or drink, but I had a wonderful experience. And I was able to see Austria and Germany from the street level. And I guess they were preparing me. And I did think, I happened to have a phone which I took from home, which I didn't know whether it was a Swiss phone or a German phone. And I had no numbers, and I didn't know if it had any money in it. But I was able to contact Barbara Wegmuller, which was very good because she could contact the person who was supposed to meet me at the train station, so they knew I wasn't lost. But I got here about an hour ago. So, and somewhere along the line, it struck me that it was very similar as to being on the street. When we go on the street, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what will happen next. And I think that is one of the reasons I've been so interested in the street retreats. The first street retreat I did was about 25 years ago. Now, Barbara is supposed to be my bodyguard. Did you notice that there are men and women that are going all over my body? It wasn't allowed when I was a monk. But I think it's on. When I was young, when I first graduated undergraduate school, I studied to be an aeronautical engineer. I worked in interplanetary work. But I was 21, and a friend asked me, we were sitting in a pizza parlor, and we had both graduated, and we were talking about our lives, because, you know, at 21, that's the time to decide on the future of your lives and what you're going to do. And I said, there's three things I want to do. I want to live in a kibbutz in Israel. I want to live in a Zen monastery. And I want to live on the streets. So I was the age of 21. As I said, it was 25 years ago that I did my first street retreat, so I was already 50 years old when I did that first street retreat. And I was doing it for two reasons. One, because earlier, when I was 21, I had said that's something I needed to do. I had already lived in a kibbutz, and I had already lived in a Zen monastery and had trained in Zen for many, many years. So I needed to fulfill that desire or that vow. But the other reason is that I was going to be very involved with working with homeless and with the poor. And I wanted to experience being on the streets. I knew I could not experience being homeless because I had a home. But I could experience what it felt like to be living in the streets and to be receiving the services that people give to street people. And I have to say that although I felt the love from the people that were serving us, I also felt that the people serving us felt they were better than us. And that hurt more than not having food. it turns out that it's easy to get food, and it is difficult to get love and dignity. So that influenced how we worked when we started working with the very poor, with homeless. And I heard that Nicholas talked yesterday about how he came on our second street retreat, and we met through a mutual friend. Well, at one point there was a mutual friend and another Jesuit, Father Kennedy, Bob Kennedy, but Bob also studied Zen with me and became a Dharma successor, and Nicholas became a Dharma successor. So in Zen, they're brothers, and in the Jesuit life, they're brothers, and in life, they're brothers. And so he came and joined on the street. He met this wonderful man, Batman, who was still around. I know he mentioned Batman. Larry. So he used the name, Batman has another unusual name, Larry. Larry Chamberlain is his Christian name, we say, and Batman is his Batman name. That's what he generally goes by. And then he has a Sufi name and a Buddhist name. Interesting man, Larry. And Nicholas invited me. He said that we're planning to do a Buddhist Christian conference starting in a year. He invited me to come, and I came, and that started a long friendship between me and Nicholas and Pia and Anna Gama. And so here we are, I don't know how many years later. Going on the streets also gave me, I had been training in Zen for quite a while, and as I'm sure you know, there are many different methods of training in Zen, one of which is koan study, which many of you here have done or doing. But there are other methods. And what struck me about koan study, if I were to put it into a methodology of what is hoped to happen, in the beginning of koan study, we're led to experience the state of emptiness. Now, that experience, of course, varies tremendously from person to person. And because in koan study you're working with a teacher, and the teacher is approving your presentation of that koan, the teacher will decide whether to keep you still working on going deeper into this experience of emptiness, or to move on. And then there's a whole series of koans which, in the terminology of, I started a group called Zen Peacemakers, and we have 3 tenets. And the first tenet is not knowing, or it's deep listening, but what's really happening in that first tenet is trying to get us to experience the state of not knowing. So it's similar to the beginning of koan study. And then bearing witness is trying to become the situation, become what's happening. And in koan study, that's what goes on. We have koan after koan in which we have to become the koan. To move on from one koan to another, it can't be that you're offering commentary. You have to present your whole being as being that koan, and that's what I mean by bearing witness. And our third tenet in the Zen Peacemakers is acting, taking actions that arise out of that state of unity, which is that state of not knowing and bearing witness. So what I did is I took in English, and it's been translated into many languages, and the translation is sometimes very difficult to get what we mean, because in German, bearing witness has been translated as Ablegen, and nobody that I know of, including all the translators, likes that term. They say it doesn't work in German. So we have to explain. We have to bring people to experience. So those three tenets, which are easily accessible to all people, and not just Buddhists, and all traditions and all walks of life, come out of what we're trying to do in koan study. In Zen. Well, when I went on the street, what struck me on my first street retreat was that we were thrust into not knowing. The brain cannot fathom what it means to live on the street. You can't rationalize. I mean, you may come to it with some ideas of what will happen, or some fears, but none of those come to be. You're in a situation where the brain cannot rationalize. So it's a good way of getting to experience that state of not knowing, or that state of emptiness. And then we stay in the streets. We bear witness to being in the streets. And what we learn, or what happens to us, is that our whole being is plunged into, where do I get my next meal? Where do I go to the bathroom? How do I get a drink of water? We bear witness to now in a very direct way. And in my first street retreat, there were about 20 of us, and some had been involved in the practice of Zen for many, many years, and had done many, many retreats and koan studies, and some were Tibetan Buddhists, and some were Vipassana students, and some people on that first retreat had never meditated in their life. And by the end of that retreat, what I found, to my surprise, was that maybe 90% had experienced a deep experience of the oneness of life. And as far as I'm concerned, the whole practice of Zen, or what I hope to be able to help, is for people to experience the unity of life, the oneness of life. Because in my definitions, well, we all know that the word Buddha means to awaken, awakened one. And then the question is, awakened to what? And in my opinion, it's to awaken to the oneness of life. And in many people's opinion, but some, it's different. It means to be joyful, or to be whatever. But in my opinion, to awaken, to be enlightened, is to enlighten to the oneness of life, and that enlightenment can be deepened and deepened. Kobadaishi, who was the founder of the Shingon sect in Japan, which is Tantric Buddhism in Japan, he lived, I think, the late 500s. He said that the way you can tell the depth of a person's enlightenment is by how they serve others. So the implication right there is that there are stages. You can go deeper and deeper. And that by looking at how we serve others, are we doing all of this just for ourselves? If so, then that we are enlightened to the state of seeing ourselves as one body. But what about everyone else? And in the streets, it turns out it can't be just about oneself. So, having had that experience, I decided to develop other kinds of what I call bearing witness retreats. Now, I should say, because of the theme, that back up a little, and in 1976, I'd had Dharma transmission from my teacher, and I was a Zen priest, and I was determined to help make our center in Los Angeles a strong place of meditation and retreats, and I get a little stuck with the terminology, but because we all mean different things with the terminology, but to have people have experiences. In those days, to have experience. And I saw my life as being a life of service in that meditation hall. We call it a zendo, the Japanese term. And then in 1976, I had an experience in which I felt the hungry spirits, the hungry ghosts of the universe crying out, suffering. And they were hungry for different things. Some were hungry for food. Some were hungry for money. Some were hungry for love. Some were hungry for fame. Some were hungry for enlightenment. There were all kinds of hungers. And I made this vow, because this came up, that I would spend my life feeding those hungry spirits, serving those people that are suffering. And that was a very important point in my life, because it changed the way I did things. Now, the venue, the place where I work, was not just the meditation hall, it was all of society. It was all of society. And while I was trained in the meditation hall, I had all these methods and things. I knew how to get you to sit straight, and how to do this and that, and how to do koan. I've done 2 different koan systems. So I had all those tools. I didn't know, what do you do in the world of business? What do you do in the world of social action? What do you do in the other aspects of society? Because now I was vowing to work in all of society. And so for me it was a wonderful time of trying to learn new upayas and new means of working with people. And not just in the Buddhist tradition, but in all, it was everyone. There was, and all of a sudden these bearing witness retreats turned out to be a very powerful form for me. And there are generally 2 elements to a bearing witness retreat. One is the place, and one is the theme. So the first one, the place, was the streets. And in a way, the topic says Zen in the streets, Well, that was just one place of my practice. In some sense, that became my most comfortable venue. It was totally free of the restrictions that we all put on our lives. And these other bearing witness retreats, while not in the streets, had that same flavor. But there was two things, as I mentioned, two things that I've always thought of. One is where, the place, and the theme. We haven't done that many different places yet. We've been doing bearing witness retreat at Auschwitz. This will be the 18th year. We do it every year. And Anagama was at that retreat. And Christoph filmed part of that retreat. Well, you were there for the whole retreat. Your movie, that's Auschwitz is a part of your film. But the theme, and it's sort of interesting to me, many people that come to that retreat automatically think that the theme is the Germans and Jews, the Holocaust. And for me, from the beginning, the theme, and it was instructed to try to work with this theme, the theme was, how do we treat others? And I was led to do this retreat in a similar way. That is, a year before the first retreat, I was at an interfaith conference there at Auschwitz, and as I walked into Birkenau, I could again feel the souls, and this time wanting to be remembered. Wanting to be remembered. And what struck me was that the souls I was feeling were not just Jewish souls. They were Kapos, they were Gestapo, they were SS, they were gypsies, they were gays, they were Polish intellectuals, they were Catholic priests, there was a whole range. And the range was people who didn't fit the idea of Hitler's club. He created an Aryan club, and everyone who didn't fit that, this was a place to get rid of them. The handicapped, the gays, the gypsies. And so the theme for me was, how do we treat others? Because in my opinion, we all have our clubs. Every one of us has our club, and we define our club, or our club gets defined by who we don't let into our club. And then there's the actions that we take upon those that we don't let into our club. And the most common action is we avoid them. You don't invite somebody that's not in your club to your house for tea. You don't watch them on TV. You don't read their books. You try to avoid them. On the streets, when you go on the streets, everybody that goes with me on the streets feels that immediately. That's the biggest experience one has, is people avoiding us, going to the other side of the street, looking away when they pass us. But we have many other ways of working with people that don't fit our clubs. We excommunicate them, that's one way. We put them in prison, it's another way. We kill them, that's another way. We beat them up. In the United States, we had lots and lots of what's called gay bashing, where people beat up gays just because they're gays. They didn't fit their club. We hung many African Americans because their skin was black, and no other reason. But that goes on and on. And Auschwitz is a place that was represented an ultimate of getting rid of people that don't fit your club. So how do we deal with others? And I always, at the beginning of the retreat there, I talk about that. The same way I'm talking now, I talk about that. And it took a year and a half to organize that first retreat, and that organization was involved in inviting as many different type cultures and countries as I could. So we had the Queen of the Gypsies of Poland, who she lost most of her gypsy family. Not personal family, but the bigger family. We had handicapped, we had gays, we had Poles, Germans, Jews, people, children of SS survivors, children of survivors. As many cultures as possible. And the last number of years we've had Israelis and Palestinians, people from former Yugoslavia. We even had people from Native Americans who were highly discriminated in the United States. We occupied their lands and still do. So we bring all these people, and the people that come think that they are broad enough to accept each other, and they find out within a few days that they're not. That different ways that different people act get different people upset, and angers arise, and all kinds of things arise. And we have process to deal with the stuff that arises. And that's the theme of that retreat. So, for example, 2 years ago in my council group, we do every morning something called the Way of Council, where we share one by one what's coming up. And in my council group, a woman came that lives in a village outside of Munich, and she said she had been thinking of coming for 15 years, but was afraid to come. She was afraid she would meet either a Polish person or a Jewish person. And another man in my group, and her grandfather ran a concentration camp. A man in my group said, he was from Poland, who lives in Krakow. He said he'd been thinking to come for 10 years, but he was afraid to come because he was afraid he would meet a German person. After 4 days, they were hugging. So can you imagine, for 15 years, this woman was afraid every day when she went out. She had this fear that she would run into a Jewish person or a Polish person. I mean, the world is very interconnected now. It's hard not to run into people from different countries. And to not run into a German person. After 4 days, they were hugging. So the experience of dealing with the issues those issues that come up like that, resolve the issues for them. I don't know if it goes so far as resolved, but they were now hugging. There was a couple of years ago, a man from California, Los Angeles, came to the retreat with his family, and he was Jewish. And at that particular time, maybe 3 years ago, we did an experiment, and we had a subset of our retreat was a retreat for youth from the ages of 16 to 22. And we had youth from many countries, from Israel, Palestine, Germany, America, Switzerland, Belgium, France. I'm missing some, but we had a wide variety. And a man who had organized the Palestinian youth to come was an imam. He was an imam, his name was Ihab, And Ehab lived in Jaffa, which is a town just a little south of Tel Aviv. That town existed for a long, long time. Tel Aviv, as you know, is newly built. Jaffa is a place, to put it in history, as the place where Jonah got spit out of the whale. So it goes back a ways. And it's mostly Palestinian. Mostly Palestinian. But there are many Jews there. So it's a fairly integrated city. Anyway, he was from that city. His family had been there 10 generations. And so I asked him, in the evening we sometimes have plenaries, panels, have a chance for people to tell their stories to the group, and I asked him to tell his story. He was married to a Jewish woman in Israel. He had 2 beautiful kids. She teaches whirling dervish, and her kids do whirling, and her father won't speak to her or the family. But they're a beautiful family, and they're a beautiful family. And the first night of the retreat, he happened to call her, to talk to her about. And that was the first time he learned, as I said, he had 2 kids already. First time he learned that her family had all died there at Auschwitz. She had never told him. His coming to Auschwitz allowed her to tell him, to talk about that phase of her life. At any rate, he spoke, and he spoke beautifully. As a very sweet, beautiful man. And then this American Jew from California came up to me after the evening proceedings, came up to me and said, "How dare you allow a Palestinian to talk here?" Now that's after I had talked about the purpose of the retreat, about how we deal with others. And I listened to all of his, and I said, "Oh, I hear your opinion. By the way, I never say that I say anything that's true. I also don't say that I say anything that's false. I always say it's my opinion. I've just gotten to that place in my life that I have opinions, and anything I hear somebody else say, I feel that's their opinion. And we can share opinions, but I'm not ready to go to war over opinions." So at any rate, I said to the man, I hear your opinion, and I'd like you to share your opinion with Ehab. So I brought him over to the imam, and they spoke until 4 in the morning. At the end of the retreat, he came up to me and he said it was a very powerful retreat, but he still has to insist that I don't invite any Palestinians to this retreat. So that retreat is all about how do we live with each other? How do we work with each other? And as we all know from the events that go on around the world, going on now, it is not easy to live with each other. And in my opinion, the difficulty is that we know the right way for you to live, and you know the right way for me to live, and if you don't accept my right way for you to live, I have to kill you. That's sort of a basic thing that has gone on among tribes for thousands and thousands of years. So that's that retreat. We did another bearing witness retreat in Rwanda. We just did that recently on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. And in all these retreats, I go and do it personally myself before we do it open. And I figure out where we're going to do it and how we're going to do it, and get a feeling of the space and the issues. And when I went, I met people that were survivors, children of survivors, perpetrators. rescuers. And as you probably know, in Rwanda they have this huge process of forgiveness where a perpetrator might, you know, they all lived together. Before the massacre, before the genocide, they were all Rwandans. And then it was emphasized that you're either Hutu or Tutsis. And then it was emphasized that the Tutsis are all cockroaches. And then, of course, in order for our nation and our family not to be sick, we have to get rid of all the cockroaches. And that's a typical method in genocides, as we know. The same was with the Jews. The Jews were called cockroaches. And there was the theme of we have to clean, we have to have ethnic cleansing. And I can understand it, certainly where I come from, if your house is full of cockroaches, we know that that's it's not healthy for us, so we call the exterminator. And we have no feelings of being wrong by having the exterminator come and kill all the cockroaches. We have a good feeling. We're cleansing. We're making it safer for our families. So that's what happened. And then the Tutsis the Tutsi army won over the country after 3 months of genocide. In 3 months, about 1 million people were killed, and brutally killed with machetes, and brutal in the sense that, well, I'll give you an example. A Hutu man brutally murdered his Tutsi wife because she was a cockroach, and his children because they had Tutsi blood in them, which made them also cockroaches. They were imprisoned. And then there was a process of forgiveness. It was an old tribal process. And people would come back to their village, to the people that were left who had had their families massacred, and ask for forgiveness. And usually at first the person couldn't do it. And then after a year, many did. And this went on throughout the country with all types of forgiveness given. And I went with my wife. We met people who had forgiven perpetrators and the perpetrators who were forgiven. But there was nobody that I met that didn't have trauma in their eyes. So the forgiveness process might have gone on for 20 years, and it did. But trauma was everywhere. It was everywhere. So for me, the theme of that retreat was forgiveness. What does it mean? Can we forgive, and what does it mean? Of course, in all our religions, that's such an important part. But how does it really happen? Can it really happen? And the place, we visited a place. It was a Catholic vocational school. Catholic Church was fairly dominant in Rwanda at the time of the massacre. And the Catholic Church was very complicit with the slaughter. And there were bishops and priests that participated in the slaughter, in the murdering. And one of the biggest ways of complicity was that the Catholic Church would offer their churches as places of refuge for the Tutsis. And the Tutsis would come in big numbers. But what they were really doing was gathering them together so the Hutus could kill them easier. So I was in a little church where the wall was all red. And it was all red from young children. It had been a nursery of a Catholic church. And these were young children who were killed by smashing their heads against the wall. And so the wall, to this day, is bright red with their blood. Well, we went to a place that was a Catholic vocational school, and at about 3 hours from the capital of Kigali, in a place called Narambi. And at that place, they have, it's a beautiful, beautiful campus, huge grounds and huge facility. And in their auditorium, they had gathered as a place of refuge 50,000 Tutsis. And within 6 hours, all 50,000 were killed, except for 10. There were 10 survivors. One of those survivors was a Hutu woman. And so her husband was killed, her children were killed, but she also had a 1-month-old baby. And she pleaded, she was Hutu, she pleaded with the Hutu folks that were doing the murdering, please leave my baby, save rest, don't kill my baby. And she succeeded. She and her daughter, who is now 20 or 21, 20 and a few months, were at the retreat we did. But we decided on that place for our retreat. So that was the place and the theme, forgiveness. And we had, the way we did it, half the retreat was African, half internationals. We had a man from Belgium. We had 10 different countries represented. A lot of countries involved in African horror stories. And we had a man from Belgium who came and said that he had been a leader of Air Force commandos in Belgium at the time of the massacre. And he had been sent with 300 people, 300 troops, all commandos, heavily armed, fully armed, to rescue a stadium full of Tutsis that were going to be massacred. And when they landed, he got orders from his government not to do it, but to help get other internationals out of the country. He came to retreat. He said that this is the first time, he talked in the retreat, he gave his story. He was in tears. And he said it's the first time he shared the story. He's never shared it with his wife. The first time he ever told the story, because he had so much guilt about, he knew that they were armed enough to prevent the massacre and to stop the genocide right then. And he listened to his orders, and he didn't do it. And 20 years ago. So for him also, the whole theme of forgiveness. Now, I didn't explicitly say this is a retreat about forgiveness, but we gathered the people to where it was natural that they, you know, there was a woman there whose arm was cut off. And she talked about how, and she was Tutsi, she talked about how she was in an area where people attacked her and they thought she was dead. It was sort of a swampy area, and somebody else, and they had hacked her baby in half. And her young baby, the other children were all killed. And this another man came along, and he just, because he wanted to, he cut off her arm up to about here. He thought she was dead, but he still, you know, he killed other people. And then she, for 2 or 3 days, lay hidden in the swamp, holding the 2 halves of her baby. And she lived, obviously. The man who cut off her arm was in prison, came out in a reconciliation process, in a forgiveness process. She wouldn't talk to him for about a year. And then she started to. They were both at the retreat, and they both told their story. And one of the things she said was, how could I not forgive him? I had to first forgive myself. But if I didn't forgive myself and I didn't forgive him, how would God forgive me? So, a theme of forgiveness. So for me, these different retreats, and we're planning them in different places right now, and that's, I see as my future work. I'm not doing any more workshops. I'm almost as old as Nicholas. Time for me to stop doing workshops, but I will keep doing the bearing witness retreats. I can't do street retreats anymore. I did my last one 3 years ago. It was a street retreat in which I invited different people that are part of the Zen Peacemaker Order that are doing street retreats. I invited them to do one together with me, sort of as the last one, and I recognize them as leaders of street retreats. It's about 10 people that are doing that. And the Begmullahs are one of those, 2 of them. But there was a man from Israel, a rabbi, who's been involved in the Auschwitz retreat for the last 6, 8 years. And he decided to do street retreats on Yom Kippur. Is there anybody that doesn't know what Yom Kippur is? Yom Kippur is the most important Jewish holiday. It means the day of repentance. And what's interesting, in the Jewish tradition, you know, the first 5 books of the Bible are divided into portions, and they're read in the synagogue throughout the year. So every week you know what portion is going to be studied, and then there are commentaries, and all of that's laid out as the way of study. On the theme for Yom Kippur service, when you read the theme, when you read the portion says, you should not be in a synagogue praising me. You should be out serving the poor. That's what it says in the text for Yom Kippur. In the Jewish tradition, it's a sin if you don't go to church on Yom Kippur. That's what you do. Everybody's in church, praising God by reading a text in which it says, you should not be here praising me, you should be out serving the poor. So what this Rabbi Ohad decided to do is to do a street retreat on Yom Kippur. So he's been doing a street retreat for a number of years now, and he does it in an area of Tel Aviv. It's near, right across the street from, there's a park right across the street from the old bus terminal, but it's an area where there are 25,000 Sudanese living, homeless. And there are also African Americans from Ethiopia and Eritrea that are living there, but not in that large of a number, just thousands, not 25,000. And so although I had done my last retreat 3 years ago, I had to do this. So I flew out to Israel for Yom Kippur, lived on the streets with the 3 groupings, as I said, the majority are Sudanese, but the 3 groupings don't talk to each other. The Sudanese, Eritreans, and Ethiopians. Tribal, the club aspect of life is so deep, so deep. But at some point, Ohad is a beautiful musician, and he started singing, and people came, Ethiopians, Eritreans, and Sudanese. and Israelis gathered to sing together. That happened in